Okay, good morning. Let's start with a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for this beautiful day. Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak about some of the things that are going on that certainly indicate that we live in a very unique time of human history. Pray that you will watch over us this day. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today, if I get my slide up here, I'm going to talk about rebellion. Now, I have to confess to you, I have been doing something along this line for probably over 20 years now. Some Sundays I would do like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. A lot of you who were with us back in those days remember that. Now it's, I was just talking to Brian, one of our great technicians here. I say great technicians. Of course, when something goes wrong, you always blame the technicians, but because it certainly could be you. But each week as I do these, it gets increasingly difficult to digest it down to just an hour and 15 minutes time frame, because there's just so much going on. And so I try to pick up, for the title, I usually try to pick up one theme, and it's rebellion. So today, as we talk about, again, this convergence of events, I'm going to focus on a few things. This is an old, the foreign policy front page on the right, or magazine cover on the right, A World Disrupted. I don't know that I've ever seen it, short of a world war, of course, which I have never been alive for, but in my lifetime, I think this is about as disrupted as things seem to have been. So I'm going to do a few things today. I'm going to start off with some scriptures to kind of put things into context about the things that I'm going to talk about. Then I'm going to talk about, like I usually do, about sort of culture type things that affect Christians, Christian worldview, and that type of thing. And then I'll talk about the Middle East. So if you only want to hear about the Middle East, you're going to have to fast forward to about halfway through, and I'll pick up on that there, because it's not possible to do it. I just think that that's the best way to do it. And I will say today that I'm pretty sure, I'm highly confident, I am supremely confident that I will offend a lot of people, even more so than I usually do, because this is the spirit of the age.
Unprecedented.
It is. 1 Timothy chapter 4, a verse or passage that we refer to quite a bit. Now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy. Now, I will tell you, I'm fighting the end of a cold, so excuse the coughing that will come about from time to time. And if it blows out the speakers, that's the sound guy's fault. So I gave him a warning. Speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry and commanding to abstain from meats, which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving of them which believe and know the truth. Paul also wrote in Romans chapter 1, and at the time he wrote it, this would have been a controversial passage. It is still controversial. There's a lot of parallels that go on in our world today relative to the world's relationship to the church that are indistinguishable from the world's relation to the church in the first century. And I think that's prophetic, because what happened to the early church, I believe, is the future of the latter-day church. Romans chapter 1, verse 16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has showed it unto them. Verse 21. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. And then he goes on to describe men with men, women with women, and men with men working unseemly things. And it is effectively a judgment of God, that God has given them over to these kind of actions. In Matthew 24, it also says this, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. I think we're seeing, especially this last part of Matthew 24, 9 and 10 unfolding today, especially in the age of social media. So let's look at a few things that are going on that I think fit within the context of the verses that I just read to you. Now, this is a story. We've talked about Jeffrey Epstein, who used to have a house just down the road here, 10 or 12 miles. And this is it. This is a headline I saw this morning, just before I came up here. Pedophile Jeffrey Epstein had 13 phone numbers for Prince Andrew. Now you might think, well, what tabloid published that? That is front page, that's on the landing page of the Times of London, a very mainstream newspaper in the UK. Now, I don't have 13 phone numbers. I think I have 15 email addresses, but I seem to have, if email addresses were money, we'd all be rich, right? So look at some of the things that are going on. This is a headline this week. Religiosity, church attendance falls sharply. And it's based on, and these are studies that come out all the time that we see. This is a Pew Research Center report. In the U.S., decline of Christianity continues at a rapid pace. Based on survey of over 1,000 people, Pew does a pretty good job of surveying these issues. In U.S., decline of Christianity continues at a rapid pace. Look at some of the statistics here. In the U.S., a smaller share of adults identify as Christians, while religious nuns have grown. And this is something that we've talked about over and over and over again here, that this is a spirit of the age. This is actually what's going on. So you see that religious people have fallen by 13 percentage points, and this is over a several year period, and those who claim no religious affiliation have gone up by about as much as the religious identifying group have defined. In Minnesota, there's an institute, I can't remember the name of it, this is from the Star Tribune newspaper in Minneapolis the other day. Minnesota Institute explores what is replacing religion for young adults. And this one looked at Catholic young people between the ages of 15 and 25 and said 1 in 3 young adults no longer belong to organized religion. A 2018 survey indicated key reason among young Catholics. And you see that they disagree with, don't accept church teachings. And if you read the article, what you find in the related articles, what you find is I don't agree with the church on same-sex marriage. I don't agree with the church on birth control. I don't agree with the church on abortion, so I'm out of here. And what should be troubling is that this is happening across all religious faiths. It is a problem. And look at the reasons. I don't agree with the church teaching. I don't believe in religion. I changed denominations. I don't believe in God, etc., etc. We have some hypotheses, one of the researchers said, as to what they're replacing this with. Sports teams, athletic groups, clubs. I don't think we're going to uncover some hidden thing, but I think we'll find that nobody is filling the gap that religious institutions once filled very well. That's why we have this sense of isolation among young people. We know there are a lot of adults who want to bridge that gap. They just don't know how. We need to build new frameworks, new pathways for how to do that. There is a way, and I had a long discussion with someone this week about this, is get back to the Word of God. It seems like it's pretty simple. If people are starving, what do? You feed them. And you don't feed them skim milk. You give them meat. With all apologies to my vegan friends. This book came out this week, Something Greater by Paula White Kane. She is, I think she has a church down in Orlando, Florida area. She had a church with her then husband. His name was Randy White. There's another person named Andrew White, has nothing to do with Paula White, so don't confuse the two. Randy White from New Mexico. But I'm somewhat familiar with this church because I spent a lot of time in Tampa back in the early 2000s to mid 2000s. And the church that she and her then husband had was right there near the airport in Tampa. So I saw it all the time. And she's done things like, she's great at raising money. She has an apartment in Trump Tower. She is the head of the Trump Evangelical Advisory Team. This is like, she has a thing about, you can buy these 7 blessings of atonement. She claims that she's not word faith. But then she says and then she does stuff like this. Thank you for approaching the mercy seat. This is a biblical day, holy day that God established as a sacred covenant of repentance and promise with you. It is the beginning of God's new year and contains 7 powerful blessings for you. Honor God with your atonement offering. A review of the book in Christian Today, her book Something Greater, said, I'll summarize it. It had like 5 points that I thought was wrong with it. Was that it wasn't very deep. It was pretty shallow. It was narcissistic. Was bad theology. The problem was that when the book came out, there were a number of evangelical leading lights, I guess I would call them, big names. Robert Jeffress, Greg Laurie, Franklin Graham, Jack Graham, who's pastor of a huge church down in Prestonwood, like a 7,500, 8,000 seat auditorium. I've been there, it's pretty. They all said, oh, look at this wonderful book that Paula White came out with. Now, some of them have taken their tweets and stuff down endorsing the book, but one has to wonder is what's driving them endorsing this. I'm trying to think of the word that I can say and not have, garbage. Theological garbage. The biblical term would be scuba line. I don't know what's going on. I see this happen and you wonder, why do people do this? What is going on? And I don't have an answer to it, except that she's very close to the president, and it's easy to get drunk with power. All of the people that endorsed her are part of the evangelical advisory team, except for, I don't think Franklin Graham is. And Jeffers admitted, well, I didn't really read it. But, I know her, and she's a nice person, which is something I used to contend was, if you're a rank heretic, the way to get away with it is to get into the friend zone. Because, well, he's my friend, she's my friend. How bad could she be? And the answer is, well, pretty bad. So we see this, and I'll talk maybe just a little bit about this in a moment. This is Washington Post, big articles on the front page this morning. Facing unbearable heat, Qatar has begun to air condition the outdoors. And they're like, well, global warming causes more heat, and Qatar's getting really warm, and so they're air conditioning the outdoors, which causes more heat, which causes, it's a vicious cycle, and we're all going to burn up eventually. And I'm sort of like, if you got the money, do it. It can get pretty hot in those. I've talked to somebody who was in Iraq serving, and they said that the person said that, the days would be in the 120s to 130, and the nights would be 95. And after you're in the 125, you would actually wear a jacket at 95 because it felt cool. This is kind of an ironic thing. This was Mark Zuckerberg gave a speech this week and came out and said, Facebook stands for free expression. And I'm like, it's been a while since I've been in Facebook, the hokey pokey there for Facebook, but I have friends who are in it regularly because of what they post that doesn't meet Facebook standards. And so I would say that, when I saw this speech and read a little bit of it, I was sort of like, what level of cognitive dissonance has to take place in someone before they're just not able to speak such nonsense? And the answer is, in this case, I don't know. Speaking of nonsense, this was in last Sunday's New York Times. A warning to moms of white teen boys. This was an editorial, it was on the back of the editorial Sunday review section in the New York Times, written by Joanna Schroeder. She's identified as a writer. I guess anybody can be a writer today. And if your views are weird enough, you can actually get published in the New York Times. And she was talking about, she has a couple boys and how she's concerned about some of the things that they're exposed to on social media, which is, I think a legitimate concern. She talks about the alt-right, like this is a huge thing. And I'm conservative, it should be pretty obvious. I don't know where these meetings take place. Does anybody know where I don't know anybody that really falls into these like white supremacist, neo-Nazi things. I've never met any of them, to be honest with you. And they'll say, well, you are. That's why you don't recognize how deep you're into this. So she talks about the alt-right, but then she says this, speaking of her children, they might hear about the border or crooked Hillary or a conspiracy theory on how the left works, Dr. Duffy said. Many of these spots are created, they're talking about videos on YouTube that radicalize people on the right. So Dr. Duffy said, many of these spots are created and promoted by organizations like Prager University, which Dr. Duffy says is not an accredited university, but a propaganda machine that introduces viewers to extremist views via video. Now, that's one, I podcast Dennis Prager's radio show. He's Jewish, he's conservative, he's not a Christian, but he's a good thinker. And so these are the radicalizing videos that Dennis Prager has the audacity to put up on YouTube. Largest YouTube channel on the planet. Last year, I think they got 1 billion views, maybe 2 billion. And they put up these 5-minute videos, and you know, they always say, well, Prager University isn't an accredited university. Like, anybody really doesn't know that? I mean, really. It's the name of the channel, that's right. And so here they are, the 10 Commandments. 5-minute video on the 10 Commandments is radicalizing people. By the way, one of the videos that he put up about the 10 Commandments was put into restricted mode on YouTube because it talked about murder. But then it says, but it talked about murder in the sense that don't murder. So about 20% of Prager University videos are put into restricted mode on YouTube, which they reserve for violent, extremist content, pornography, and that type of thing. And I will say I got them beat because I think when I went through and looked recently, all but 2 of the last 100 videos, prophecy updates I had done were in restricted mode on YouTube. And we have people unsubscribed all the time from our channel, you know, and people get offended and they want to unsubscribe. That's fine, you know, that's, go in peace, that's what I always say. But this is a problem. You know, this is, so Google and Facebook, well, we don't censor, you know, we're all for freedom of speech, but you're for freedom of things you agree with. That's what you're for. This week, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes on this, and I can see I'm already running up against some of the things. Attorney General Barr, William Barr, went to Notre Dame a week ago Friday and gave a speech on religious freedom. You can find the transcript of it at the DOJ, Department of Justice website. Just go there and type in Barr speech and it'll pop right up. I have, you know, it's about a 40-minute speech and I thought it was very good. Now listen, this is, I feel like I always have to have this giant disclaimer every time I reference somebody, okay? So if I reference PragerU, somebody will point out, well, he's Jewish, you know, or if I cite William Barr, well, he's Catholic. And so, listen, I point these things out because I think people make a good point and they should be recognized for making a good point. But when I do that, it is not an endorsement of everything that they have said, are saying, or will ever say in the future. You got it? And now I know that's hard for people to understand the nuance there, but I don't endorse everything that William Barr has ever done, or every administration that he served in, or that type of thing, or his law firm. I think he was with Kirkland and Ellis before he came to be Attorney General for the second time. So I'm going to play, he gave a great speech. He talked about religious freedom and how religion is under assault. So let's just kind of jump into the middle of it. Here's a couple points that he was making in his speech.
So the founders decided to take a gamble, and they called it a great experiment. They would leave the people broad liberty, they would limit the coercive power of the government, and they would place their trust in the self-discipline.
Okay, that's not working. So I'm going to just, if you will give me one moment, I think I have a better, well, better yet than that, what I'll do is this. Let's see if this one works. Okay, well, that's unfortunate. It sounds great in my headphones. So let me, give me 1 second here. I'm going to, because I think you need to go find, you can find the video online and you can watch it. Hang on 1 second. Okay. He talks about the fact that in a government like ours where you have freedom, you have to have some kind of restraint. On the other hand, he says, unless you have some effective restraint, you end up with something equally dangerous, licentiousness, the unbridled pursuit of personal appetites at the expense of the common good. Now, listen, you know what this sounds like to me? And I'm not tooting my own horn. This sounds like he's doing a prophecy update at Notre Dame University Law School. Because he's talking about the things that I seem to talk about all the time. So you have licentiousness, the unbridled pursuit of personal appetites at the expense of the common good. This is just another form of tyranny, where the individual is enslaved by his appetites and the possibility of any healthy community life crumbles. So the founders decided to take a gamble. They called it a great experiment. They would leave the people broad liberty, limit the coercive power of government, and place trust and self-discipline in the virtue of the American people. In the words of Madison, quote, "We have staked our future on the ability of us to govern ourselves." This is really what is meant by self-government. It did not mean primarily the mechanics by which we select a representative legislative body. It referred to the capacity of each individual to restrain and govern themselves. And this is an extraordinary speech. This is the Attorney General of the United States. Mike Pompeo gave a similar speech this week. I don't even have a copy of that, but it touched on some of the same themes. In short, Barr said, in the framers' view, free government was only suitable and sustainable for a religious people, a people who recognized that there were transcendent moral order antecedent to both state and man-made law, and who had the discipline to control themselves according to those enduring principles. So he goes on, the Judeo-Christian tradition gives us rules to live by. Modern secularists, he claims, dismiss the idea of morality as otherworldly superstition imposed by a killjoy clergy. In fact, Judeo-Christian moral standards are the ultimate utilitarian rules for human conduct. They reflect the rules that are best for man, not in the by and by, but in the here and now. They are like God's instruction manual for the best running of man and human society. I think that we all recognize that over the past 50 years, religion has been under increasing attack. On the one hand, we have seen the steady erosion of our traditional Judeo-Christian moral system and a comprehensive effort to drive it from the public square. By the way, I'm thankful that we have an attorney general that would say this in public. Can you imagine Eric Holder saying this? No, not in this, maybe in a parallel bizarro world universe. By any honest, on the other hand, we see the growing ascendancy of secularism and the doctrine of moral relativism. By any honest assessment, the consequences of this moral upheaval have been grim. Virtually every measure of social pathology continues to gain ground. It sounds like he's doing the prophecy update. In 1965, the illegitimacy rate was 8%. In 1992, when I was last Attorney General, it was 25%. Today, it is over 40%. In many of our large urban areas, it is around 70%. Along with the wreckage of the family, we're seeing record high levels of depression and mental illness. And I would add, dispirited young people, soaring suicide rates, increasing numbers of angry, alienated young males, and an increase in the senseless violence and a deadly drug epidemic. As you all know, over 70,000 people will die a year from drug overdoses. This is more casualties in a year than we experienced during the entire Vietnam War. I will not dwell on the bitter results of the new secular age. Suffice it to say that the campaign to destroy the traditional moral order has brought with it immense suffering, wreckage, and misery, and yet the forces of secularism, ignoring these tragic results, press on with even greater militancy. Among those militant secularists are many so-called progressives. But where is the progress? We are told we are living in a post-Christian era, but what has replaced the Judeo-Christian moral system? What is it that can fill the spiritual void in the hearts of the individual person. And that is a system of values and what is a system of values that can sustain human social life? I'll say it again. This is extraordinary speech by the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States of America. The fact is, he says, that no secular creed has emerged capable of performing the role of religion. Scholarship suggests that religion has been integral to the development and thriving of Homo sapiens since we emerged roughly 50,000 years ago. It is just for the past few hundred years that we have experimented in living without religion. Sounds like Romans chapter 1. We hear much today about our humane values, but in the final analysis, what undergirds these values? What commands our adherence to them? Now there have been times and places where the traditional moral order has been shaken. In the past, societies like the human body seem to have a self-healing mechanism, a self-correcting mechanism that gets things back on course if things go too far. The consequences of moral chaos become too pressing. The opinion of decent people rebels. They coalesce and rally around obvious excess. Periods of moral entrenchment follow periods of excess. This is the idea of the pendulum. We have all thought that after a while, the pendulum will swing back. But today we face something different. That may mean we cannot count on the pendulum swinging back. This is extraordinary. Of course, there was reaction to it. At the New Yorker, Jeffrey Toobin said, William Barr's wild misreading of the First Amendment. Toobin said this, historically illiterate, morally obtuse, and willfully misleading, the speech portrays religious people in the United States as beset by a hostile band of secularists. Actually, he says, religion is thriving here. But Barr claims the mantle of victimhood in order to press for a right-wing political agenda. This is what the left does. They project. Whatever they complain about is what they are. They are morally obtuse. They are against religious freedom. Perhaps the most galling part of Barr's speech under current circumstances is its hymn to the pious life. He denounces moral chaos and irresponsible personal conduct, as well as licentiousness, the unbridled pursuit of personal appetites at the expense of the common good. By contrast, he says, religion helps train, teach, and habituate people to what is good. Throughout this lecture, we can only wonder if William Barr has actually ever met Donald Trump. And what you learn here is that on the left, no redemption is ever possible. The sins of what you did when you were 15 years of age, or the made-up sins of when you're 15, show that you can never be redeemed and you have to be destroyed. Exhibit A, Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh. Extraordinary speech. Now look, this has real-world implications. This is an article from the Daily Mail a few months ago. This is a book that came out, Inventing Transgender Children and Young People. The book that dares to take on the transgender myths told to children. This is look at the two-page spread that it got back in July. This continues. Furious mothers boycott Flora after it pulls its advertisements from Mumsnet and Transphobia Row. There are people, this is in the UK, they're concerned about what's happening to their kids. And so they came out to this book. What happened is, and what you see down here in the lower corner, though, is NHS, National Health Services Children's Clinic, used lawyers to silence critics of the book, or to silence critics of what they're doing. They wanted to shut down this book. So they hired big law firms and they threatened them, said, oh, you're violating, some kind of patient confidentiality and things like this. And so I thought, well, maybe I can get a copy of the book. So I went to Amazon. And you see what it says here? Currently unavailable. And they had a list in one place I looked. So I went to Apple Books. Maybe, no, item not available. The item you requested is not available in the United States store. So I went to World Catalog. This is a catalog for libraries. Okay? See what it says way down here at the bottom? Sorry, no libraries with the specified item were found. Maybe Google Play, they're free speech, right? We couldn't find anything for your search. Well, maybe Barnes & Noble. Sorry, we couldn't find what you're looking for. And then the last one, I think, was the Book Depository, currently unavailable. They have an organization in England called Mermaids to help children go through this transition. Christian Concerns had a press release just last Sunday. 74-year-old Christian governor suspended for questioning introduction of LGBT pride in books in school. This lady has been in education all of her life. She's 74 years old. She grew up in Barbados. She's a Christian. And they had a public meeting, and they were talking about, hey, we're having Pride Month, and there's all these LGBT books in the children in the library for our kids to read. And she merely said, should we be doing this without parents letting the parents know? She's been terminated. Oh, by the way, she was the governor of a Christian school. What? I know you're thinking I get accused of this. You got to be making this stuff up. I carefully researched this stuff. Look at this. This is the Sentencing Council in the UK. Public Order Offenses Guideline. This is a report in the Daily Mail this week. Now trans and gay hate crime will mean 6 months in jail. They say here, the police say the abuse claims, these claims of transphobia and that type of thing on the internet have reached over 100,000 per year. The police can't even investigate them all. The instructions, really, this is in the United States, when you get convicted of a crime, like in federal court, there are sentencing guidelines, and they give you a score. And for example, are you nice to dogs and little kittens and that type of thing? And that might give you half a point off. And if you post on social media something they don't like, that gets you like 1,000 points. I'm exaggerating a little bit. And then they add up the points, and that determines how many, in the federal court, it's how many months you'll spend in prison. So you might get, you'll be in there for 360 months. That's 30 years. And you can get things. So they have sentencing guidelines in the UK. So they come out with this publication. The instructions released yesterday by the judge-led Sentencing Council, the statutory body that recommends punishment levels, means transgender hate crime offenses will receive harsher sentences than domestic burglaries. For those who commit the hate crime from a position of authority or plan to incite serious violence or whose activity was persistent and widespread, the typical jail sentence should be 3 years and as much as 6. And if you want to read them, you can go to www.sentencingcouncil.org.uk. So this is the world. This is rebellion against God. And now we see all kinds of rebellion going on everywhere we look. For example, here's, they tried to arrest the son of El Chapo down in Mexico. And have you seen the video of this thing? There's automatic weapons and things in the middle of a city in one of the cities in Mexico. The drug cartel was resisting it. And finally, they had the guy in custody and they let him go because they couldn't keep up with the weapons that the cartel had. This is lawlessness. In Spain, Catalonia separatists were sentenced this week, and now there are protests all over Spain. This is a protest the other day in Barcelona. In Chile, they raised subway fare, and protests have led to a widespread revolt across the country. In Lebanon, there are protests this week about tax increases, and the government is on the verge of falling. I believe the Christian wing of the coalition has resigned from the government. And these are protests that took place in Beirut just the other day. And it's interesting, what flag that is important in Lebanese politics do you not see in any of these protests? The Hezbollah flag, because Hezbollah is really part of the government. But I mean, look at these, they're burning things in the street and that type of thing. So it's sort of like there were protests in Ecuador. It's like everywhere you look, there are things going on. In Africa, there are tensions rise between Ethiopia and Egypt over the Nile River. The Nile River is very important. This is from the Financial Times this morning website. Addis Ababa has near completion of Africa's biggest hydroelectric project on one of the, I don't know if they have the Blue Nile or White Nile, but whatever tributary of the headwaters of the Nile they control in Ethiopia. They put up a giant hydroelectric dam. They're going to fill up the thing. Well, when you fill up a dam, what happens to the water downstream? You have less water downstream because you're filling it up. And what happens to Egypt? Egypt is 90 million people roughly that all live in a little narrow strip. I mean, like 99% of them along the Nile River. And they're highly dependent on the Nile River. And they go to war over it. It happens in the United States. This is a crowd estimated at 25,000 people in Queens yesterday to celebrate that Bernie's back. In the UK this week, there was a thing called Extinction Rebellion. International Rebellion begins October 7th. They're protesters. They were getting on. I didn't have time to grab the videos. They had protesters in the tube, the subway. They would get on top of trains, and the trains couldn't go because somebody was standing on top of the train, and it was shutting down things in London. Now, I will give the people credit. You know what they did? Got up there and drug them off and drug them out of the subway station. Good for those people. That's big thumbs up. Take it into your own hands. They're blocking traffic everywhere. I saw a guy, they were blocking it. They had the traffic. He just walked up and he ripped down the sign. He said, people got to get to work. Get out of here. In very colorful language. Brexit is, big protest about that in the UK. I mean, I'm just telling you, this is just sort of a short little summary of all the stuff that's going on. This is an editorial cartoon from one of the London papers today about what's going on. Thought he had a Brexit deal, didn't have a Brexit deal. Too close to what Theresa May's like. Nobody likes it. Everybody's upset. Is Brexit going to go? Is it not going to go? Whether they're going to have a hard exit from the EU without a deal? Are they going to have a deal? It's crazy world. So I'm going to focus on Syria. Now I want to make a couple of comments first. Here is Syria. And this is the area that's in dispute. Northern Syria. Turkey wants a 30-mile wide zone. Yeah, my thing's not showing up, is it? This is beautiful on my computer. Let me I can get a laser pointer here. No, but I have like a spotlight that I can show. Well, anyway, let's just go with the laser pointer. So Turkey wants this 30 kilometer wide safe zone along the border. Now, this is very hard to present in a rational fashion, so I may recover ground a little bit just because it's easy to get very confusing. But so this is what Turkey wants. This is what Erdogan said when he was at the UN. And so if you look at the yellow area right now is what Turkey had. The green areas are controlled by Kurdish forces and Kurdish-related militias. This whole area that's sort of gray is government control, and then this red pinkish area is other opposition. So what happened in the Syrian civil war was the Syrian civil war started here in Dara. If you see right here, that's the Sea of Galilee here in the lower left-hand corner. And Darwa here in the south is where in March of 2011, the protests started and they spread. This area, this is the Euphrates River that goes down through Syria into Iraq. The Tigris is over here to the right that you can't see. And so this is a Kurdish area. This has long been a Kurdish area east of the Euphrates River. This is Dar al-Zor. This is Raqqa. Raqqa was the capital of the Islamic State. So at some point, the United States made a deal. Rather than having all of our soldiers fighting the Islamic State, we agreed to do training and provide arms and provide air support. So the U.S. and its coalition partners against the Islamic State engaged in about 11,000 airstrikes over the time they were fighting the Islamic State. The Islamic State was eventually largely defeated, but it didn't go away, and it's coming back. So this area here and this area near Dar al-Zor is the sort of the oil-rich region, and this is the breadbasket area of Syria. It's where they grow a lot of their food. And they had a big drought for a number of years, and the food production went down, prices went up, and that's what led to the riots, and in part led to the riots in 2011. So with the help of the Russians and the Iranians, the Syrian government under Assad has been able to regain control of a large portion of the country, about 80% of it, but this 20% has remained under Kurdish control. And it was sort of a standoffish thing about Kurdish control when the government didn't have the civil war going on. Now, the civil war in Syria started, there was about 21 million people in Syria when it started. Somewhere between 600,000 and 1 million have been killed. That's like 1 out of 20. That's a lot for a whole country. About 7 million or more, 7 or 8 million, had left the country that survived. And that's why Turkey has 3.6 or 3.8 million refugees. Jordan has another couple million. Lebanon has over 1 million. And we know what happened with Europe. And so Erdogan has been saying, hey, I've got 3.6 Europe. If you criticize me, if you call what I'm doing an invasion, I'm going to just turn loose these 3.6 million refugees that I have, and you can deal with the problem. And guess what? Erdogan would do it. There's no doubt about that. Now, the Syrian government, even though they have Russian support and stuff, I don't think they're that strong. Their armed forces are that strong. I mean, it's taken them, this started in 2011. It took them until last year to get control of these areas, some of these other areas, and even here up at Aleppo, they didn't have problems. But what they did was they took people from Dara here in the south, and they bused them up here around Idlib. And so now there's about 3 million people there, and that's where they've been trying to regain control. And it's not going particularly all that well. They were able to change, like, for example, if they had 80% of the country after months, including with Russian support, Iranian support, well, they don't get a lot of Iranian support there because the Iranian goal is something else. They want their route to the Mediterranean, and they want to get at Israel. So they're more concerned about the south of the country. So up here in the north, they don't really mess around with it too much. And Turkey sees an opportunity to do something about it. So I talked last week about what the president said. He had a phone conversation with Erdogan, and he said, look, we're done with this. We're pulling out our troops. Now, we only had I've seen anywhere from 28 to 100. But if you look at the Turkish mouthpiece newspapers like Daily Sabah, and you watch those every day for months and months and months and months, at least 3 or 4 times a week, one of the major articles on the front page of Daily Sabah was, U.S. needs to get out of here. We don't want to do joint patrols. We want a safe zone, all of this stuff. So when Erdogan did a speech at the UN, if you've been following what he's been saying and what his minions have been doing, it was no big surprise that he wanted this safe zone. He wanted to control it. So so this is sort of, again, the green area is Kurdish control. The yellowish area is Turkish control. And you can see here in this northern part how Turkey they started in to this region. Now, the reason they chose between Tel Abyad and Ras Al Ain as an area is that's a heavily Arab area. If you remember, there was a big battle for Kobani back at the beginning of the war with ISIS. For example, here is, I believe this is a suicide bomb that took place by ISIS in Kobani many years ago. And I think you might remember some of the pictures of Kobani. It was effectively, it's just trashed. It was just destroyed. So what happened was that, so this area is I think about 75 miles in distance. That's where Turkey started. This area still has a lot of Kurdish support and that type of thing. And the Kurds are a mix of a lot of different people. I do not believe this. I think frankly, it's Turkish propaganda in many respects that all Kurds are terrorists. There are bad Kurds, okay? There were Kurds that participated in the Armenian genocide back in the time of World War I. By the way, unlike Turkey, they've apologized for their participation in that. Some of them are terrorists, some of them are Maoists, some of them are communists, socialists, all of that thing. But to say that all Kurds are the same or all Kurds are terrorists is baloney. And they were promised a homeland, but they never got it. And I believe to this day they are the largest ethnic group on the planet that doesn't have their own homeland. They're strung over 4 countries. You have them here in Syria, you have them in Turkey, you have them here in Iraq, Iran, and Iraq. In fact, here's sort of a breakdown of the ethnic thing. The green would be largely Kurdish, the yellowish would be mostly Arab. So what Assad with Putin's help did, and Iranian help, which are Shia, and Assad is an Alawite, which is sort of a form of Shia, is during the Syrian civil war, and I've played you clips of the NATO commander, and what he says is they bombed the areas where the Sunni Muslims lived, and they got people on the road, and people swept, they went to Turkey, they went into Europe, and they made all of those people somebody else's problem, which is what General Breedlove, or Commander Breedlove, said when he testified in front of Congress probably 4 years ago now. There's a picture here of the Kurdish, the lot of women in the army that serve, that are fighting. But it's very, very complicated. So I disagree with the assessments that all Kurds are PKK or terrorists. But PKK is a problem. We recognize it as a terrorist organization. But here is Hulusi Akar, who is the defense minister of Turkey, and he tweeted this the other day. And the Turkish translation down at the bottom says, "May Allah punish them with your hands and make them miserable. Let them win by helping you. Let the believers give relief to the hearts of society." So there were a number of tweets and statements and things like that by people in Turkish government power. And it's clear this is jihad. This is a jihad by Erdogan to expand the reach of his caliphate. And so the concern is that he doesn't just want this 30-kilometer wide swath along northern Syria. In fact, he has said, his defense minister has said, look, we'll go further. They may go all the way down to Dar el-Zor. And I showed you maps where back in 2015, they were using these in Turkish media, showing that they wanted to go all the way down to Mosul, which is, I believe Mosul would be down further, and it's in Iraq. This is the Tigris River. So very, very complex situation, to say the least. In fact, there was a website this week that put up a picture of, and it was attributed to the defense minister Akar in Turkey, and this is what the map looked like. Okay, you see Mosul, Erbil, which is the Iraqi city that's the capital of the sort of independent state of Kurdistan within the nation of Iraq. And look, they go all the way up to Georgia, Azerbaijan, all the way even over into Greece and all of Cyprus. Now, people are saying, oh, that's just propaganda. Somebody put that up. Turkey would never do this. But listen, there's maps all over the place that show that what Erdogan wants is to expand Turkey to be sort of recreate the Ottoman Empire. And the images that are used in media are kind of interesting. These are from Turkish media. You see how the tank is following the great commander that's leading them into battle. So this is highly complex. So everybody was upset. What happened was when Turkey invaded, so as Turkey moves into these areas here, between these two cities, Syria, with support of Russia, moved their troops up here. So Turkey kind of said, okay, well, we're not going to really, and the SDF, which is the Syrian Defense Force, it's a Kurdish militia group, sort of an army, they turned over the Kobani border crossing to Syria to kind of forestall the Turks. Because why? Well, they're concerned about the Turks, and with good reason. Historically, there's a lot of animosity between the Turks and the Kurds. And so there have been a lot of cross-border attacks and terrorism acts and all sorts of things. But there used to be, over here in Afrin province of Syria, Turkey came in, they saw the opportunity to expand their borders, so they came in and they took over Afrin. At the time that they did that, there were around 400,000 Kurds that lived in that area. They left. They moved over into these areas over here. The Syrian refugees went from here, they went to Turkey, they went to Jordan, they went all over the place. So and so the U.S., when the U.S. withdrew, Turkey immediately went in. And people say, well, they gave them a green light to do this. Of course, the newspapers were, see here, Russia-backed Syrian army sweeps in after U.S. announces abrupt exit. The House of Representatives entered into a joint resolution by a vote of about 340 to 90 to condemn what President Trump had done. Of course, people have been all over the media condemning President Trump for this. And I believe I said last week that I could see a reason for it if he was trying to set up a conflict between Russia, Syria, Russia, Turkey, and Iran, put them at odds. But the fallout from that is going to be what I believe, and a lot of people believe, would be ultimately a slaughter of the Kurdish people in the Syrian areas. And so there's been a lot of pushback. This headline from the Jerusalem Post: Trump decries endless Mideast war, swears allegiance to Israel. And this is what Trump promised to do. He promised to, try to end the wars that the U.S. was involved in. Now, I don't believe any of the troops have come come back. They've been moved elsewhere, and I also heard that there were a commitment of between 1,500 and 3,500 troops to go to Saudi Arabia. So I don't know that we're bringing the troops home. Seth Frantzman, who has written a lot about this, said 6 years of work destroyed in 6 days. And Seth spent a lot of time up in the Yazidi areas. I remember the Yazidis were a small ethnic religious group that was pretty much slaughtered by ISIS. So there's been a tremendous amount of fallout. Now, one of the things that I think people have sort of lost in this, and I disagree, I respectfully disagree with the president's approach to this. He sent this letter to Erdogan, don't be a fool, let's work out a good deal. Erdogan supposedly took that.
These discussions, deliberations, talks in Congress, these evaluations made about myself, my family, my minister friends are very disrespectful to the Turkish Republic. It's not knowing our place. Therefore, when faced with a situation like this, of course there's nothing more natural than an evaluation.
So Erdogan supposedly threw the letter in the trash. He then went to the PKK party headquarters and gave a speech, not PKK, AKP party. It's hard to get all these letters right. And so he's doing this, he's widely praised for what he's doing. I mean, the Turkish people love this by and large. They're all for it. If you're not for it, there's been people arrested and thrown in prison for criticizing what Erdogan has been doing on social media and everything. I know of dozens of arrests that have taken place. So you can see here, I mean, the people are just wildly supportive of Erdogan. He says, listen, he says negotiating with terrorists is not an option for Turkey. He considers all Kurdish people to be terrorists. There was also a meeting this week of the Turkish-speaking people in the United States, or in Turkey. I think I need to turn the sound off on that. Essentially, he's just saying this, look, we're going to do this, and we want your support, all of you Turkish-speaking countries, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, all of those countries from Central Asia, we want you. So Pence went to Turkey to meet with Erdogan. It was initially reported that Erdogan was not going to meet with Pence, that he would meet with Trump if he came here. He's got a pending date in November for a state dinner at the White House with Trump. And a lot of people are upset by this because in some respects, it looks like Erdogan gets everything that he wants. So there was a meeting with Pence and Pompeo. They supposedly came into, and it's reported different places, a 5-day ceasefire. The Turkish headline I'm going to show you is 120 hours to clear is what it says. And here's what Pence had to say about the agreement. Whoops. Let me back that up, start that over. Okay, here's Pence.
1 week ago, Turkish forces crossed into Syria. Earlier this week, President Trump took decisive action to call on Turkish forces to stand down, to end the violence, to agree to negotiations. And today, I'm proud to report, thanks to the strong leadership of President Donald Trump and the strong relationship between President Erdogan and Turkey and the United States of America, that today the United States and Turkey have agreed to a ceasefire in Syria. The Turkish side will pause Operation Peace Spring in order to allow for the withdrawal of YPG forces from the safe zone for 120 hours. All military operations under Operation Peace Spring will be paused, and Operation Peace Spring will be halted entirely on completion of the withdrawal.
So now Turkey comes out and says, no, it's not a ceasefire. It's a pause. And there are reports all over the place today that attacks continue between the SDF and Kurdish militias. and the militias that are supported by Turkey. And this is what's happening is everybody's using proxies. We use the Kurds as proxies in the fight against ISIS. Iran uses proxies. That's Hezbollah is one of their proxies. They have proxies all through Syria so that, the Iranian soldiers don't really have to go there in very great number, and Iran can accomplish its goals. And I saw a good article this week. I cannot remember where it was. Maybe it was in Foreign Policy saying, the U.S. could take some lessons from Iran about how to conduct modern warfare, that we ought to be using proxies more. And we did. We used the Kurds as a proxy. But now the concern among a lot of people is, look, we just tossed them away when we were done. And a lot of people are upset with that, they call them allies. They weren't necessarily allies. They were partners. Turkey, is like, well, Turkey's an ally in NATO. I would highly recommend that you go get a book available online at the Center for Security Policy, Ally No More, Erdogan's New Turkish Caliphate and the Rising Jihadist Threat to the West, published about a year and a half ago, because Erdogan has very big designs. Again, this is not necessarily a fantasy. And there are reports of chemical attacks, and so when the chemical attacks happen, Erdogan says, oh, that's the Kurds doing it to themselves because they're trying to garner sympathy. And so it becomes very, very difficult to find out who's telling the truth. Based on what I've been able to tell, I think that what the most of the good information that I've been getting has been from Kurdish sources on Twitter. They're the ones who are under attack. They've tried to withdraw from some of the areas, but they've not been able to because of airstrikes. So they've been sort of hemmed in, and Turkey's saying, well, see, they're not withdrawing, so we need to go in and continue our operation. So this is sort of what the situation looks like. Turkey's effectively come in to the safe zone in these blue areas, and is exercising some control. Here's a little report. I'll just play a part of it from southfront.org. Now, this is a Syrian website, pro-Syrian government, and so you have to take what they say with a grain of salt. But I find that, first of all, this is one of their maps. They do fantastic maps, and I love fantastic maps, especially when I don't spend the time to put them together. Here's a little report they published middle of the week.
On October 16th and 17th, the Russian aerospace forces were conducting airstrikes on positions of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in northern Latakia and southern Idlib. According to local sources, the most intense strikes took place near Tataya, Kafar Sijna, and Rakaya Sijne. After Turkey's Operation Peace Spring started in northeastern Syria on October 9th, Idlib militant groups carried out several attacks on positions of the Syrian army in the southern part of the de-escalation zone. Most likely, militants believed that the Turkish incursion into Syria would draw attention of the Syrian army and allow Hayat Tahrir al-Sham to capture at least several villages in southern Idlib. The Syrian Air Force and Russian aerospace forces responded to these attempts with precise strikes on positions of radicals. ISIS is another group that decided to take some advantage of the Turkish actions. On October 17th, the terrorist group announced that its units had freed an unspecified number of women affiliated with the group from the HQ of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, in the village of Mumudi in western Raqqa. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, about 14,650 ISIS members remain in 7 detention camps in the area controlled by the SDF. Additionally, there are 8 camps for displaced persons, including relatives of ISIS terrorists. The number of people kept in these camps may reach 120,000. Turkey's defense minister, Hulusi Akar, warned that terrorist groups, i.e. Kurdish militias, are planning to stage a chemical weapons provocation to accuse the Turkish army of using chemical weapons in northeastern Syria. In previous years, Ankara repeatedly accused the Damascus government of conducting chemical attacks. In those cases, Turkey was not very interested in talking about some terrorists' involvement or pre-planned staged attacks. Turkish-led forces continue their advance along about a 120-kilometer-long chunk of the border. Especially intense fighting is ongoing in the town of Ras al Ain, a part of which still remains contested. The deployment of the Syrian army around these areas is aimed at preventing a further advance by Turkish-led forces. Just recently, the SDF handed over the Kobani border crossing to government troops. Therefore, if the SDF-Damascus deal is implemented, the Turkish presence will be limited to the border area from Tel Abyad to Ras Al Ain. On October 17th, the US and Turkey agreed on a temporary ceasefire in northeastern Syria. According to the agreement, Kurdish forces have to withdraw from the 32-kilometer deep area within 120 hours. If this is done, the Turkish military operation will not be resumed.
So, we don't know. Is that all perfectly clear? It is a very highly complex situation. Pompeo went to Israel to meet, said that Israel has a right to defend itself. This is from, I think, the Washington Post or something. I forget which newspaper. Oh, Haaretz this morning. Kurds lost Trump but are winning the fight for U.S. public opinion. And, everybody's got an opinion about this. Here's an editorial cartoon from an Arab publication, Trump serving up the Kurds to Erdogan. This is from a Turkish publication showing how Turkey is cutting off the head of the snake, the tail of the head of the snake being the Kurdish SDF and PKK, and the tail of the snake being the Jews, of course, which control everything. I'm going to play just a short clip to finish up. Here's what Erdogan said this week. Peace Spring will resume if promises are not kept. Gatestone Institute has a very long article, How Erdogan Planned This Ethnic Cleansing All Along. There's been great reports done by Seth Frantzman and Jonathan Spire. In fact, let me just make reference. I'll do two things and then we'll finish up. And again, I apologize for the length of this, but this is just... we talked about how does this play into Bible prophecy and that type of thing. And so we know that there's sort of this loose alliance between Turkey, Russia, and Iran. We think this is prophetically significant. But you have to remember, too, that whatever's going on is not, I see a lot of people saying, well, they're on the borders of Israel. They're ready to go for Ezekiel 38. And no, they're not, because Turkey is up here in the north, and here's the Golan Heights here. And from here to this area is over 250 miles. From the Golan Heights to northern Israel, and it's about 450 miles up here to the northeast corner of Syria. So I don't think it's accurate to say that they're on the verge of invading Israel. They don't even have their own act together. But here's what Jonathan Spire said in his article. By giving Turkey a green light and look, Jonathan Spire's studied Syria extensively. I think he's one of the more reliable sources on what's going on. He has a lot of sources there. He was just in the Kurdish areas of Iraq recently. He may have also been over in the Kurdish areas of Syria. So he just says this, by giving Turkey a green light, this is in the Wall Street Journal the other day, to invade northern Syria, the U.S. upended the balance of power in the Middle East with a single stroke. Russia is the biggest winner. Now, he goes on to cite there was a meeting that took place in December of 2017. I played these clips for you. This is Putin coming to Syria to meet Assad and say, hey, we've had these great victories. We've taken back a lot of the country. He's met at the airport by the Russian commanders. Then he's going to meet Assad. But I want you to watch what happens when Putin goes to speak at the podium. Watch Assad. There's Assad there. You see him on the left. And here's Putin starting to approach the podium, and you'll see Assad come into the picture, and watch what happens. So, now this is an extraordinary thing. Did you see what happened there? The Russian commander grabbed Assad and said, no, you don't get to go up there. That was pretty significant. The other thing Spire noted, which is something I think I noted back in December of 2017, they had a meeting with all the Russian commanders and forces, but there was one guy in a different uniform. And see the guy there in the green fatigues? This is the head of the Tiger forces. That's sort of the elite Syrian army group, and he was brought into sort of the inner circle to meet there. And you can see here, he's sort of like giving the eyeball to, who's that guy taking my picture? Look, the Assad regime would not have survive without him. And so this guy, Colonel Sohail Hassan, commander of the Tiger Forces, is he's the only Syrian that was at this meeting with Putin about what's going on in Syria. So what happened when they entered into this pause or ceasefire the other day, the Kurds said, hey, we're going to get slaughtered by the Turks. So they ran to Assad. And so it says here, the detail, this is Spire's article, the detail of the Assad-Kurdish agreement includes a provision for the abolishment of the SDF, the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, with all the current Kurdish forces and military groups joining the 5th Corps Assault Legion under Russian control. Russia also has its own forces embedded in the Syrian Arab Army, notably in the 5th Assault Corps. So this is, I think, a fairly significant development. Here's what Spire says. It is worth pausing for a moment to consider what this means. The SDF consists of some 100,000 seasoned fighters. Until this week, it was the sole armed force able to operate east of the Euphrates. Since late 2015, when the U.S. Special Forces helped midwife the alliance, the FDS constituent parts, the Kurdish People's Protection Units, the YPG, as well as the Assyrian Christian forces and Arab tribal militias, have fought under a single banner. In the victorious campaign to retake territory from the Islamic State, the SDF has been the decisive actor and the U.S. ground partner of choice. Suddenly, this powerful army appears to be coming under Russian control. The Kurds still operate their civilian administration east of the Euphrates. Their forlorn hope is to salvage and maintain as much as they can of the autonomy they have painstakingly built since 2020. Ba'athist regimes, Mr. Assad's as well as Saddam Hussein's, are noted for unforgiving attitudes toward ethnic separatist projects, and especially those of the Kurds. It says this, but the Kurdish ruling Kurdish party in eastern Syria maintains an office in Moscow. Such hopes as remain will depend on Russia. No one else is available. By triggering America's departure and the rush of the Kurds to embrace Mr. Assad, Turkey's action delivered 2 long-sought gifts to Russia. And then he concludes with this. Then there's Israel and Iran. Mr. Assad, the Kurds, Turkey, and Israel all now depend on Moscow's approval to advance their interest in Syria. This outcome has been sealed by the week's sudden windfall, all without the firing of a single Russian bullet. All roads to Syria now run through Moscow. Mr. Putin could hardly ask for more. Now, listen, and a lot of people support Trump. I get that. They want people to come home. But there is a cost to what's taken place here. I'm just going to play a minute of Dalton Thomas of Frontier Alliance International, who lives in the Golan, who goes over and ministers to the Kurds, talking a little bit about what he sees as the big problem here.
What the Turks are proposing is moving down into the SDF-controlled area. So now you would have, instead of 2 colors, picture them colors, let's say green and yellow. Right now it's green and yellow, the maps in the country. What Turkey's proposing is green, yellow, and black. Green, yellow, and black. Black is now going to be the safe zone that's controlled by Al-Qaeda affiliates and Free Syrian Army, a radical-leaning Free Syrian Army. There was some good Free Syrian Army boys. There were some very good ones. And those have been swallowed up by ISIS and by the likes of some of these guys. So now Turkey controls northern Syria because Assad's not going to move into there unless the Kurds, which they're not too keen on this, they cut a deal, but the deal's not really the deal, and still the regime forces aren't fully there. So who knows what's going to happen there? That we don't know what's going to happen with the regime and Iranian forces, because what could change the game is if Iranian forces can come in and then push the FSA groups out. But that would require the Kurds cutting a deal with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard through the Assad regime and giving concessions away completely to where the Kurds then have no arms, no protection, no territory, no rights, no homes, and now they're just in Assad's new Syria watching Turkish forces move into their homes, literally. That's what's happening. what would then happen is Erdogan would probably wait a few months, and he would then use the ISIS sleeper cells in the area who've been liberated and who've been reintegrated into the Turkish forces and the FSA forces, which has been happening a lot over the last few days. They would then continue the fight to move the border even further down south. And that's really, in closing, the main thing that you need to understand what's taking place right now. This is a sophisticated land grab on the part of the Turks to take the land that they said they would always take. And what they're using in a very sophisticated way is to manipulate the European Union and the United States, for the European Union and the United States to facilitate what they want. It's absolutely brilliant. Erdogan kept thousands of refugees, millions of refugees, and said, we are going to let them loose on Europe if you guys impose sanctions, if you stop sending us arms and military equipment, we're going to loose them on you. And the European Union said, okay, no, you keep them, we'll do whatever you want, we're going to keep our mouths shut, we're not going to, no worries, no problem. Erdogan now has control over the EU, and the EU is not, and they're terrified of this, so they're not going to do anything about it. And now, Erdogan has profound power and influence over President Trump and the Trump administration. To be clear, no concessions were made by Turkey tonight. No concessions were made. No, nothing was made. What was agreed upon would be that the U.S. would lift sanctions, return to friendly relations with our NATO ally, and as long as we, the United States military and government, facilitate the ethnic cleansing of Northeast Syria so that Turkey can move their own forces into it. That's what just happened. So, we need to pray. We need to pray with wisdom.
Well, I would recommend go to their Facebook page, Frontier Alliance International, although they were put in Facebook jail for posting pictures of some of the atrocities that the Turkish troops were committing. There's been several hundred Kurdish civilians killed in these operations. Assad is not a good guy. Not Assad, Erdogan is not a good guy. And right now it seems like he's gotten pretty much everything that he wants. And I'm concerned about that. There are a lot of Christians in that area. And as Dalton says later in his video, Turkey won't protect them. The Kurds tolerate them. He's afraid there's going to be a slaughter of Christians in that area. So pray for the people there. Pray for wisdom and people in our government. And again, the specific tie to Bible prophecy, I think, is the potential setting up of a conflict between Russia and not Russia and Iran and Turkey and Iran. Because the interesting thing in this is like all week long is like nobody talked about Iran. Like Iran disappeared from the pages of everything. So they want to get their border crossing in place down here at Abu Kamal, and they also want a road up here into northern Syria to get to the Mediterranean. That's what Iran really wants. So they're working on this down here right now at Abu Kamal. So look, let's pray about it, but it's a very volatile situation. And I do think it plays into Bible prophecy. We know that this is going to be one of the key areas of the world where these wars and rumors of wars are going to take place. So let's pray. Father, thanks so much for your guidance. We pray that, Lord, that you will give strength, guidance, the power of your Holy Spirit to our Christian brothers and sisters in that area as they live their lives for you and as they attempt to share the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ with the largely Muslim communities around them. Pray that you will empower them and protect them, and we pray that you will give leaders in the world wisdom on how to deal with this incredibly complex and difficult situation as we see potentially some very troubling things unfolding right in front of our eyes. Lord, give us comfort by your Spirit for the volatile, rebellious world that we live in today. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.